everyone, welcome to Movement and Me, an initiative that is designed for budding artists across the world who wish to pursue their career in art. I'm your host Niharika, and on this show you will hear artists talk about their lives and the choices they had to make in pursuit of arts. We will also get to use some tips and key learnings from the lives of these artists, along with a detailed discussion on their areas of interest. So quickly hop onto a journey into the world of arts along with us. Hi everybody, welcome back to part 2 of this series where we are here talking to Sri Lakshmi about her experience through dance and what are the things that she feels we need to start talking about. In the part 1, we talked a lot about her experience learning 3 different kinds of dance forms, Bharatanatyam, Mohiniyattam and Kuchipudi, and her understanding of what it means to relate bodily through a form and express yourself using the structure that the form offers. She also talked about space as something that needs to be discussed and looked into, especially during the COVID times, since clearly we cannot step out of our spaces and go to a theater or go to a performance space where we all can sit together and enjoy a piece. In the part 2, we are going to look closely at some of the things that Sri Lakshmi has done and has explored through her performance and through her experience in Mohiniyattam. And we're going to look closely at how she has tried to look at these questions and approach these issues from her end. So you recently wrote an article, Sri Lakshmi, about a performance that you did, which involved you cutting your hair as part of the performance. And there have been mixed reactions to that, where people have said, oh, that's interesting, to people asking you questions about why did you have to do that? What was the point of it? So can you tell us a little bit about what your thoughts were when you did it, and why did you feel like you had to try something like that out?
So it was actually a protest performance action, which I did as a part of my university curriculum as our assessment system wanted. And we were workshopped by the faculty members before the performance, everything thoroughly looked upon. And personally, my protest action involved me cutting my hair while I was in the Mohiniyattam costume. And I also chose to do a very traditional composition from the Sopana repertoire of Mohiniyattam. And as I performed that, while I performed that, I also took my pair of scissors and cut my hair. So this was the protest performance action which I did. And this actually had a lot to do with how I related the idea of hair, the component of hair, with dancing. And now I realize that I have a certain exposure, or as I previously mentioned, for some people it's very scary to speak aloud about certain things because of a lack of vocabulary. So now that I have a little access to vocabulary, and now that I look back, I realized certain things that I did as my growing up in my childhood. So one of it was, every time I had a haircut, or every time I wanted a haircut, there was this, I'll only cut my hair this much because I have a dance performance the next week, or because I have a dance performance in the coming month. Or it would be that, I would maintain a certain hair length because I have to tie my hair for the dance. So this aspect of dance with relation to the hair has been very significant for me in my personal, experiences. And you may forget all that I'm saying, but just look at you can we could just think visually about a performer on stage having short hair and perhaps wearing the rest of the costume. And I'm sure this sight is going to be disturbing for some of us, or we might say it's not aesthetically pleasing for some of us. And I think that very disturbed thought, or that very calling it not aesthetically pleasing, speaks a lot about the problems of what kind of narratives are we used to watching on stage as performers or as spectators. And it had a lot to do with the identity of the woman, the identity of the dancer. So even for me, this was something I wanted to question through the protest performance action, which was the body marker, the ideal body figure of the dancer. And after cutting my hair, uh, I realized, even not as a dancer, just as a woman, how much importance this hair has in my everyday existence. That people would just walk up to me, even if they are strangers, they would just walk up to me and ask, "Why did you cut your hair? What was the reason behind cutting my hair?" Or even now that I have short hair, and now when I tell people that I am a dance practitioner and I perform Mohiniyattam or I practice Mohiniyattam, they definitely have a very bewildered expression on their faces, and they would be like, "But your hair." So I think that but and the bewildered expression on their faces speaks a lot about the problems of or the kind of politics that are happening around the space of the body in the field of dance. So these body markers and the body ideals which are created by certain institutionalization that happen was one question that I wanted to pose. And one another personal experience because of which this result of haircutting came was also uh, in Kerala, there are a lot of school competitions that happen uh, for extracurricular activities like dance, music, and everything. So for dancers, for young dancers, like right from I think standards 4 or 5, when they're exposed to performing on stage, we're asked to wear padded bras. We're asked to wear 2-3 saris under the Mohiniyattam costume, so that there is a certain figure, that maybe that hourglass figure of the woman, which is which comes on stage as a result, and hence one would look aesthetically pleasing or beautiful or feminine, as we call it. So this has been a culture that I am used to, and I'm sure so many people in Kerala, right from a very young age of standard 4th grade, can relate to it. So one can imagine the kind of what kind of narratives are fed into the body ideas right from such a young age. So even for that young performer, it's like, if I want to become a dancer, if I want to pursue dancing, I need to have a certain height, I need to have a certain weight, a certain butt size, a certain breast size. So everything is ideally fed into the body of the dancer, and that is also hugely problematic. So because of all these experiences, I thought one aspect of questioning would be the body ideal, the created body figure image of the dancer. Another aspect that I wanted to question was the gender politics aspect of it. And today, at a time when we say that gender is non-binary, and when we look for gender as a performance, and there is a performativity in gender, uh, one could just very casually think about the kind of gender performativity that is available to the spectator watching dance. And one aspect of it is that we strictly have a male costume and we have a female costume, and there are these strict categories, these binaries created. And even within this binary, we could notice that when the male performer can easily have short hair and the rest of the costume and dance on, it is as if the female body should have a certain hair length, and the certain costume aspects should be adhered to by the female dancer body, whatever that female category is, which is also very problematic. So the body ideals and the gender politics were two aspects which I really wanted to question through the protest performance action.
Those are quite interesting observations and conversations that we are just having. But when you say gender, why did you feel the need to stick to hair though? I mean, there's something about the hair that you felt needed to, needed to be told or expressed. There's something about the hair that seems to be quite a big deal. And you, rightly so, you pointed out that, you have to have longer hair. So where do you think that notion comes from? And why did you choose to do it with the hair and not anything else? For example, say the costume, or maybe the way that your body is supposed to move. There's this, of course, we do say that all classical performances are non-binary, but are they is the question that then comes into picture when you say gender. So why did you choose to stick to hair? And I also recall that you were looking at Mohiniyattam, you were beginning to question and look at Mohiniyattam slightly differently, and you were focusing on the Mohini aspect and what the understanding of Mohini is and what it conveys. So can you talk a little bit about that as well?
Yeah. Rightly as you said, there are so many ways and there are so many angles from which one could look at gender performativity in dances. And my idea of cutting my hair was only my personal experience with it, because what triggered me, what affected me the most, right from childhood, what affected me, I think maybe of all other components, this has been a very significant part of my body that people kept questioning. People kept on saying, you're not supposed to cut the hair. So, because it has a very personal touch to my everyday existence, I chose to cut my hair. I chose to do this from the point of view of my hair and maybe not other parts. And I believe, and I'm sure there are so many people also, questioning gender through their own existences in their own, positionalities. And it is that maybe at this point, hair is something which I would like to question. And I'm not denying that costume does not have any problems. Of course, costume also has its own problems, but uh, because I have enough vocabulary or experience to, question the hair component of it currently, I chose to do that. And maybe at some other points, maybe once I get to know enough about the costume aspect of it or other problematic aspects of, ways of looking at costume, and of course, definitely more of it, movement and techniques of the grammar of Mohiniyattam, uh, I think I would also start speaking about it as soon as I have the vocabulary. And uh, for me, what struck me the most was, this one question of just thinking about, does that mean if a short hair person, comes up and says that I want to dance, will that person be denied the opportunity to dance? Then, if it is a yes answer to that, then the space of dance is usually problematic. It's a very limiting space. But my understanding of dance has always been a sense of freedom. And I don't want to believe that dance is a limiting space or, restricting space, saying only these and these body types can come and dance. And hence, I think I used the very own tradition, the very own structure to undo or redo the structure. Using the very own, grammar of Mohiniyattam, I wanted to also reclaim my freedom in performing Mohiniyattam. And it had a lot to speak about my everyday existence and the community that I live in, with the kind of questions I face every day with respect to my hair. And I think this is also a very slow process, right? It keeps on troubling you for years until, like for me, it had to reach a saturation point for me to just burst it out and speak through the form of dance. And a lot of it also has to do with the institutionalization, because the institutionalization has only has only now given us one major dominant kind of narratives, like in the form of stories, in the form of costumes, in the form of what we see on stage. I think it's necessary to question. And I'm not saying, if somebody chooses to perform with long hair, that's wrong. But I think these are certain major dominant narratives one needs to question and understand, and then decide whether you need to perform that or not. And to your question of the Mohini figure, reading about the figure of, reading about the history of Mohiniyattam, I came to know that Mohiniyattam was initially known as Tevidichiyattam. And Tevidichi, there was a transformation from the word Tevidichi to the word Mohini. And that came as a result of institutionalization attached to it. And if we look at the term Tevidichi today in Kerala, it is a very derogatory term that is used. So even that is very problematic in how Tevidichi has transformed to Mohini, in who made the term Tevidichi as what it is now, or why is the term Tevidichi a very derogatory, used in a very derogatory sense today? And this has a lot to do with the institutionalization of the art form. And as a result of which, a certain caste appropriation has happened. And as always, a certain class appropriation is happening in the classical dances. And for me, the figure of Mohini has been hence a very, uh, conflicted thing. So even to speak, even to just say Mohiniyattam, or even to just use the name of Mohiniyattam has been something very problematic, because we realize that in the institutionalization, uh, even the naming is, even the name carries a lot of politics to it. So for me personally, I've always, even today as I use the term Mohiniyattam, as I call it Mohiniyattam in a certain sense, I keep asking myself every now and then if I have to call it Mohiniyattam, or, I keep questioning myself and I don't think I have reached an answer. Or even to not call it Mohiniyattam or call it something else, I realize that naming is a very, very, struggles in space. It's a very careful space one has to deal with, considering, even my own positionality. So again, there is a question of what right do I have to name it. Uh, so I think every time I use the word Mohiniyattam, there is a lot of conflicts attached to it, or maybe I'm using Mohini with, within quotes. And yeah, I am reading more about it. I am conversing with people. So maybe I will be able to say something in a while. Maybe I'll find answers, maybe I'll not find answers. But, currently it's a very conflicted naming, even as I speak it.
Thank you for pointing that out, because it's something that there's a similar narrative that goes in Bharatanatyam as well, which was the name was changed from Sadir to Bharatanatyam sometime in the during the independence movement, and there seems to be a lot of politics involved there as well, as to why why that happened, what are the things that are involved in the process of renaming and restructuring an art form into making it what it is today. So I think institutionalization is definitely one aspect of it, but there are other politics involved within the space, like the nationalist project, and the idea of what it is that we want to convey as a country. Because I think India as a country has a lot of pockets and has a lot of culture in it already, and to be able to deliver it as one country and to say that, okay, this is the country and this is the homogenization is the word that we're looking at, things like that. So I think there's a lot of politics involved there as well, which we can talk about forever and ever. But keeping the time aspect in mind, I'm going to ask you two more questions before we end the interview. So you have talked a lot in the entire video, in the entire podcast. You've talked about vocabulary a lot. You said you do not have the vocabulary. You're learning the vocabulary. You're evolving. You're growing, and you're putting things in your, like, teaching yourself certain ways of articulating your questions and figuring out what is the best strategy to move forward. On that note, can you tell us a little bit about how your master's program in the Ambedkar university has actually shaped you and helped you into um, asking, or sort of helping you identify these questions, articulating them, and how is the university's program helping you into making the process a little more smoother for you into figuring out who you are as a dancer, a performer, an artist, and a researcher for that matter.
Yeah. So currently I'm pursuing masters in performance studies in Ambedkar University, as you mentioned, and it has definitely and definitely helped me a lot in giving me a sense of strength and exposure to question my own practice. So there has been a lot of reading and discussion, which for me personally has never been available in the dance education system otherwise, speaking very personally. So that was something which I loved, reading certain histories and understanding performance theories, in knowing that there are so many other artists around who are putting into their practice their own subjectivity and carrying it forward in brilliant ways. So the university space has offered me that kind of a exposure in speaking to other practitioners of my age from various backgrounds, to have the privilege of having discussions with certain faculty members. So it has definitely been a very eye-opening experience for me personally. And um, yes, that as I keep mentioning, I got a certain vocabulary to start questioning because, as I mentioned, there for me personally, there has not been this fear component. I was always scared to speak, and I still am. I'm not denying. I still am scared to speak. So many other things, but I think there is a little comfort. There is a little backup that the university gives me, or asks me to read more about it, to understand more about what you are practicing, to understand the history of it, to consider your own positionality, to understand, the kind of audiences you want to perform for, even the space, or even who are you performing as, all these questions. But at the same time, I would agree that, because there is a lot of difference in the art school education versus the university liberal space education, so many of it has always been also been very conflicting for me, that I was left, as an unsettled person most of the time, stuck in between the two. Um, but there are its own comforts and discomforts that one has to struggle to find the way forward. And definitely there is also this theory versus practice hierarchy or division that one faces. And I think the way to move forward is to, at some point, try to make both the ends meet, and then, have a balance of it and start moving forward. Yeah.
Thank you so much. I think that was quite clear and succinct. So that definitely helps us understand some of the aspects of what you talked about in the entire podcast series, where you mentioned vocabulary and the idea of questioning and critically thinking about certain things that are presented to you at face value with respect to your art forms. So thank you so much for answering that question. One last question before we end the entire podcast is, as an artist, as an enthusiast, as someone who's already pursuing and researching and questioning and constantly looking for where they stand in the art form, what do you have to say to all the dance enthusiasts who are also maybe in in similar spaces, or who are moving towards becoming a little more serious about their art form? What do you have to say to people like those?
Yeah, I think I would use the title of the podcast series, very beautifully given, Movement in Me. And I think that speaks a lot about, this space between the movements, whether you want to speak about the movement in everyday lives, the casual movements, or what would one would want to look at movement as dancing, and the space, and, my subjectivity, me, my mind, my body. And that in betweenness, I think that speaks a lot about, finding and conversing with your body, conversing with your mind and movement, and somewhere bringing a balance of both and making the two ends meet, to understand the comforts and discomforts, to understand where you're struggling with, and, what are your own problems, considering your own subjectivity, your own positionality, and how would you want to create something out of it. And I think as much as one is holding the idea of movement or dancing closer to me, I feel it is always also necessary to, hold it a bit far from yourself, so that you can have a better look at it at times. And I think that helps a lot in moving one forward, in creating and exploring more of both me and the movement. And I would always believe that dancing is not at all anything that is restricting. It's always present around, and there is a sense of freedom attached to it. So I always believe dance is not restricting, and with just that thought of dance not being restricting but a very liberating space, I think there is a lot for one to just look into our own practice, our own education system, and figure out where are we facing problems. So yeah, that's it.
Okay, so thank you so much. That was a very beautiful way of putting movement and me, something that I also personally did not look at it as. So thank you so much for putting it all there. And thank you so much for participating in this podcast series with us. and giving us insights and information, and also talking to us about your struggles with learning dance and with participating in certain aspects and performative elements of dance that is required or requested of each of the art forms. So thank you so much for participating.
Thank you. And I have to mention that your questions and discussions that we've had, it's actually making me to think further. It is also actually pushing me to think further about it. And I think it's a whole learning and unlearning process. And I think this discussion has been very helpful for me in that manner. So thank you for having me.
That's amazing. I'm glad I was able to help. So thank you. I'll see you again some other time. But to the audience members, we'll see you again next week with another artist and another interviewee who's going to share their journey with us. But until then, stay tuned and keep looking out for some of the snippets from this particular episode. Thank you all for tuning into Movement and Me, an initiative that is designed for budding artists across the world. To continue receiving notifications on our latest episode, please subscribe to our YouTube channel Natya Mandalam or look us up on Apple Podcasts or Spotify for more information. I'm your host Niharika, and I'll see you all next time.